All right, hello everyone. My name is Dave and welcome here to NTD Racing. I got COVID and I'm stuck here in the garage quarantining and doing some work on Lefty, our budget trophy truck. And if you've been following along, we just got back from Bentech and we have about 115 tubes sitting in the fab shop back there getting ready to be welded. And so today I'm going to show you what I do to go from this nasty greasy tube, and this is they come in different ways depending on where you buy them from. Some are a little cleaner. This one happens to have a whole lot of oil on it and mill scale. And so how do you take this down to something that you can TIG weld? Realize that when you TIG weld, you want it to be bright, shiny metal. Anything that's on there that is not bright, shiny metal is going to mess up your TIG weld, and it's going to blow up your tungstens, all that kind of stuff, and it's going to make it really hard to make a continuous bead. So how do I go from something that looks like this to something that is totally shiny and ready to weld? Let me show you all the steps that I go through to get these things ready to weld.
All right, so I'm starting this whole cleaning project with just some Dawn dish soap, water, and some Scotch-Brite pads. And I'll just acknowledge this right now. There is no way to look cool while you're cleaning pipes. It's just impossible. But if you want to be a fancy pants race car builder, then you got to clean some pipes and you just got to deal with it, and I'll accept that. Anyway, my goal here is not necessarily to get these things ready to TIG weld. It is to get them really clean, clean enough to take paint right away, so that I don't have to do that later on, because it'll be a lot easier to have these things totally clean and ready to paint now. And then the next step will be for TIG welding.
Again, I'm not the best MIG welder in the world, but I think these are totally clean enough now to MIG weld. But to take them to the next level, to TIG weld them, let me show you what I've kind of got going on over here with a tool that I made. And I think that you see a lot of TIG weld projects where the ends of the tubes are totally cleaned off, but the rest of the tube might not be. I think the way they do that is they chuck it up into a lathe and they spin them and they just run some Scotch-Brites on the end. Well, I don't have money for a lathe, but I have a bunch of scrap parts in the garage, and this is what you get. So let me show you what this thing does. So this is obviously just some parts I found around the garage, and what I do is you hit my drill and it starts spinning that wheel right there. And then let me show you what I got going on over here. Get the drill out of the way. Here's the tube sitting on just some casters, and you see it free spins, and those casters I have welded to just some scrap metal, and it had to be long enough to where I could basically tack weld these casters to the scrap metal side by side, and they have to be able to caster, so it has to be able to something I can clamp down the table and the casters won't hit as they swing around. But from there, both these casters just kind of free spin on both sides. Now they're oriented, side by side, but as you rotate them, that actually puts the center of the casters further and further apart, and allows you to, as you put this tube down in here, ideally what I want to have happen is that tube to be sitting down far inside the roller, so it doesn't want to naturally spin out of there. So if you rotate this plate a little bit, so loosen this thing up and rotate that plate a little bit, then it sits that thing further down in there, and it just makes it, I think, a little bit more stable. Besides that, it's just clamped over here on this side where the wheel is, and that way, as you hit these things and that tube starts to spin, it's going to want to go, the tube's going to want to go one way or the other, and so you got to basically pull this wheel left or right to make that thing not want to go shooting out the end. And so by having it mounted over here like this, you can get it pretty close, and then while it's spinning, you can kind of, while the tube is going, you can kind of pull it left or right to make it stop, the tube's motion stops, so you can get the end of that tube cleaned up. And it works, it works pretty good. Let me go ahead and set the camera on a tripod and clean one up just so you can see how well this thing works. Well, all right, this thing works pretty good, you know, and it cost me nothing just because I have these things sitting around. My wife's so happy that I keep this stuff. But anyway, I have these things just sitting around in my shop, and I figured I'd put them together this way, and it works really well. And then once I'm done spinning it, you can kind of see that shiny. That's going to weld up really nicely. I do take my die grinder. I have a little flap disc on there. I clean out the inside, and I will just kind of lightly brush the outside of the copes such that I make it nice and shiny, just to take a little bit of that mill scale off that you get whenever you do any kind of plasma cutting. Besides that, just a couple more steps I'll show you here before we get ready to lay down some beads on these things. All right, well, that tool is pretty cool. Just be careful, you know, safety glasses, gloves and all those kinds of things, leather gloves so you don't get your hands cut because the ends get sharp if you make something like that. Anyway, the next step is just to get the ends of the tubes clean. I have a bottle of acetone and just some clean paper towels, and what I'll do is just kind of clean up, especially the area right where I'm planning on welding, getting all of the oils off of those tubes. Once they're clean, what I made for myself are these wooden blocks. Now, why did I make these? Just because even though my table is totally flat and it's got all these anchor points to hold these things down with, round tubes are frustrating because they start rolling all over the place while you're trying to mock up whatever it is you're making. So these things are just, you know, it was what it was some 1x4 wood. It was like a, I don't know, 2-foot long piece, and I glued some strips on there just wide enough to cradle a 2-inch tube in there. And then I cut them down. Once the glue dried, I cut them down to 2-inch sections on my my miter saw, and from there, and so what that does is it allows me to move things around without things rolling, and especially once I get the copes kind of oriented, it gets to be kind of a pain as those things kind of roll around. This keeps them a little bit more in place. So let's go ahead and just start getting all the tubes on here and get them all cleaned up and mocked up, and we'll start welding. All right, perfect fit. Again, amazing job, Bentech. Just, gosh, the results are amazing. The gaps just are non-existent. It's gonna be a perfect weld on each one of these. It's gonna be super easy to do. I'm excited to get to it. Before we do though, don't forget anything that's part of the welding process that can make any kind of contamination, you gotta clean, which also means, you know, your consumables. Make sure you get those welding sticks all nice and clean. I use the same stuff, just the acetone, to get all the oils and residue off these things before we start to weld. And once these things are ready to go, we're gonna clamp this stuff down. Just make sure we measure, triple check everything, and then get to it. Let's go ahead and get to some welding. All right, here's a look at everything ready to go. It's all square, everything's cleaned up. I think it's ready to put down some nice welds. Got all the stuff ready, the table cleaned off besides stuff I'm gonna use for welding, and a whole mess of tungstens ready to go, because I go through these things like crazy. Anyway, it's time to get to welding. All right, here is a quick look at the results in my welds. I think they look, you know, they look good. They're going to be strong welds. I am happy with at least the penetration and the quality, the strength of the welds. You know, I could probably do a little more work as far as getting consistent beads. You know, that whole stack of dimes thing, I can still work on that, but I'm getting close. I think by the time we get to the main hoop of the roll cage, we're going to be totally dialed in. These things are going to look really good. So happy with that. All right, time to clean this one up and move on to the next job, where I will be making the hoop for the B-pillar. And if you're wondering how on Bentech you take something that's got bends in it and also cuts or copes at the end, and how you deal with that, I'll show you everything you need to know to get that done. Well, I know that there are a lot of guys who do this stuff and are much better at it than I am. And if you have any suggestions, please leave it in the comments. That'll help out everybody else. And if you have anything you want to see in future episodes, leave it in the comments, and we'll make sure we include that in future episodes. If you just want to say something nice and tell the YouTube algorithm that you like this video and it should show it to more people, that surely helps us out, and we definitely appreciate it, along with liking and subscribing. All those things are much appreciated. Anyway, we'll see you in the next episode. Take care of yourself.